Thanks for having me, Vatan. Like the Gurung, I flew across on Thursday, so after having experienced the summit and experienced Yerevan. So what can I tell you about it? It was a 3-day summit. It actually 3.5 day, let's say, because there was a welcoming event on Friday night at the National Gallery of the Arts, where the Prime Minister, the President of Artsakh, and Nazar, the Global Commissioner of the Diaspora, the High Commissioner of the Diaspora, all gave speeches. And it was a nice event to kind of get to see the other participants in close quarters before the event, which started on Saturday and continued through Monday. There were about approximately 500 attendees from what I could gather. Obviously, during the course of the event, people would come in and out. If nothing else, it was a success in that it brought many disparate voices together to discuss the issues that concern both Hayastan and the diaspora.
You know, we are always faced with these issues, challenges Armenia faced, diaspora faced. This idea of bringing Armenia and diaspora closer together has been ever since we know the history of Armenian people. My question to you is, what are the ways, what are the constructive things that you can bring us? What are some of the ideas that you think we could adopt here?
Well, attending the event, one of the things that struck me is that, you know, we tend to think about the Hayrenik as the diaspora and Hayastan, right? But the diaspora is not a monolith. The diaspora is also made up of many different types of Armenians, right? So especially those, and then there's also the Hayastansis who are now part of the diaspora. And I think our interests in some manners differ from each other's. I was there in my capacity, well, I was there as a private citizen, but obviously also in my capacity as the chairman of the Hovnanian School. I was asked to speak about Armenian education in the diaspora. And so I'll speak a little bit, even on that narrow topic. Many of the schools have different challenges, right? So in our challenges that we face in New Jersey, that has strong public schools, etc., is very different than the challenges faced by the Australian Armenian community or by even the California Armenian community when it comes to schooling. So I think that was eye-opening to me, is that yes, we have similar challenges, but also given the disparate places we live, we have we are not monolithic in how we should be approached, and how Hayastan can help us, and vice versa, how we can help Hayastan. So to me, that was the takeaway, and I think it was eye-opening, and it led me to, I think what we need to think about as that is, first of all, I don't see how this could all function under one umbrella, because there's so many different needs per community. So I think the powers that be really need to come together and think about the strategies that we have to develop to help each community on its own terms.
Nazar, you know our community, you know how we think, you know how we act. One of the questions was, how come Nazar was invited? What was the election process? What was the selection process?
I really don't know. I mean, I got an email in August being invited. A few weeks later, I also received an email asking to speak on a panel. My understanding is that no organizations were invited per se, but it was only individuals in the diaspora that were invited. And those who chose to attend were there. I saw a very wide cross-section of attendees, both in terms of representatives from various countries, both in terms of expertise. There were some familiar faces from our region. Dr. Kim Hekimian was there. Arda Nazarian was there. As were some familiar faces from California and from France. So, it looks like they got an interesting cross-section of diasporans to attend.
Before the global summit took place, just a few days before the summit took place, there was an article in the papers saying that this move by the Armenian government is going to divide us rather than unite us. I'm sure you read the article. What do you think?
I find it hard to believe that an event that's meant to bring people together from across the diaspora is divisive. It's per se inclusive. My understanding is that those who are invited and chose not to attend. All had their various reasons not to. Yet the reason I read in that article and in other places was that now is not the time to have an event like this. That given what Armenia is going through, especially with regard to Artsakh, now is not the time to spend resources on a diaspora summit. Personally, I disagree. I think now is exactly the time to show, for a show of unity, to show that business will go on just because of the threats from abroad or from Azerbaijan. It doesn't mean life stops in Hayastan and life stops in the diaspora. We are vibrant and we continue to be thinking about the future. And I think that's why now was the right time to do something like this.
In fact, I also understand, at least that was announced at the summit, that similar meetings will be taking place in the future. So this is going to be an ongoing annual or a few years at a time meeting such as this will take place in Yerevan.
My understanding from Zare Sinanyan is that they will be there's approximately 10 hours of footage from this event. They're going to be watching this footage, analyzing it, and coming up with action items for future summits. And perhaps they might be narrower in nature. For example, a summit on education or a summit on public health or defense. And so that's the plan. If I had some constructive criticism of the event, it would be that it was a little bit too much of the panelists speaking, and there wasn't really an outcome, a goal, a list of goals, for example, a list of action items that were created. Again, I understand that's coming later, but I think, especially with a small summit like this, 500 people is quite manageable. I would have loved to have seen working groups for the first couple of days, and then sessions where the working groups talk about their white papers. Something like that would have been interesting to see.
Nazar, we are very open discussing anything, and one of the questions I have for you is just your thoughts. There were no representation of the church. There was no clergy, I saw. And if I'm right, that whole summit was boycotted by the church. What was your take? What do you understand of the situation?
If an event is good, look, let me tell you first of all what I would have done. If there's an event going on that I'm invited to, and I know that both the Veapaj was invited, as was the Gatorigos and both Gatorigoses were invited, and they both chose not to attend. Personally, if I was invited to an event where I had disagreements perhaps with what was going on, either I or a representative of mine would attend, because what better way to fix that narrative than to go there and participate and let my views be known. I thought it was a shame that it was a little bit performative, the not attending, right? They had the opportunity to just say, to politely decline, yet it was a little bit of a performance to say we are not going to be there, almost like a finger in the eye. They have their reasons. I would have loved to have seen them, particularly with regard to education. I think what the church has to say and the church's thoughts on the matter are very important, and it's a shame we didn't get to hear it.
You heard quite a few other panelists, and the language used was mainly Armenian and English, but I also heard some Russian. What do you have to say about the use of languages?
Yes, it was mostly in Armenian and English. There was some Russian. We have a lot of diasporans attending from Moscow in particular. I know on the public health panel there was a physician from Moscow whose organization did great work during the war in Artsakh in 2020, and there were, and sometimes they just like we do when we're speaking Hayeren, Makur Hayeren Chenkenar Kosideprenanklerin Parel Gecharning, they were doing the same thing in Russian. And what's interesting is when you're at an event like this, it's being translated instantaneously. You have a headpiece in your ear where you're hearing the translation directly. So if I'm speaking in English, you would hear it in your ear in Armenian.
I did not know that.
Bites, if I switch between languages, it makes it very hard for the translators. They get stumped, right? So it was encouraged that we speak in one language. I chose English because I feel I can explain the nuances of what I'm saying better in English. And there was also an interesting disparity between, there was Arab Lahayran and Arab Mudahayran, Western and Eastern Armenian, which also added some linguistic complexity to the whole thing.
There was a gentleman by the name of Stepan Asturian, I believe. He spoke beautiful Armenian, really beautiful. And it really brings us to understand how beautiful the language is. And he got stuck on a word, and he did not know the Armenian word for scenario. And he said, right? And he continued. Let me just add one more thing which really impressed me. And one of the panelists was Ruben Vartanian, and I think he was on Zoom. And they spoke about the different challenges. And one of the challenges we all have, whether it's in this studio, whether it's Hovnanian school, whether it's in Armenia, this is indifference of the people.
I don't know if I agree. I don't know if I agree with Ruben Vartanian that there's indifference among the people. Again, first of all, what is the people? Who are the people? The people of New Jersey are different. The Armenian people of New Jersey are different than the Armenian people in Hayastan, and the people in California. So that level of let's call it engagement, not indifference, differs. During my panel, they asked, how do we support the diaspora and why are Armenian schools important? And this came up. I think it goes with what Ruben was saying a little bit. In the United States, where we're free to be anything we want to be, it is much easier to get complacent, to not fear for your heritage, because it's not in danger necessarily. But that lack of engagement, that comfort, that taking it for granted, let's say, over time leads to quicker assimilation. And one of the questions our panelists asked through a discussion we had earlier, our panel moderator, was the difference between the New Jersey area and Istanbul, for example. Because she said in Boris, there's 50,000 Armenians, and yet there are 16 Armenian schools with a student population of 3,000. Whereas in New Jersey, as you mentioned earlier when we were talking, there's about 100,000 Armenians, yet we have one day school that has a population of 130 students. Why? How could that possibly be, right? And I chalk it up, a lot of it, to the fact that we are comfortable here. Whereas in Turkey, as an Armenian, you are never allowed to forget that you're Armenian. You're always aware of the dangers facing you as an Armenian, and therefore you galvanize, and therefore you give much more importance to your heritage. So, I think to answer your question, it depends on where you are. I would say the Armenians in Boris are very engaged in being Armenian because they have to be, whereas here we have the luxury of not being engaged if we don't want to be.
Nazar, before we go into just a question in Armenian, is there anything else you'd like to add to what you said so far?
No, I'd like to thank the High Commissioner and his office for putting together this event. I thought it was well organized and valuable. And she's going to be in here in a second, but I also want to thank Seta Kantarjan for the wonderful event last night. I was there, Vartan, and talk about engagement. We had so many Armenians there celebrating our heritage. What more could we ask for? So that is why I was saying earlier, I disagree with Ruben to a certain extent. I think engagement is high, and I think we have to harness that, especially with regard to our school. If we could get some of that community to really engage with our school also, and increase our enrollment, the future is ours.
Գիրես Nazar գիտեմ որ հայրենով գրնաս արդայդվիլ թեև անգլերենը ավելի երբեմն ջուրում կա բոլորիս մեգը ֆրանսային գծեմ հարաճ տերտի խմբակիրներ սա որ ժամանակները կփոխվին եւ այս օրերս մի գոմանի միախոսություն չէ որ գդիրե մեր աշխատանքի մեջ չես գնա միան խոսիլ ինձի պետք է ինձ իար լսես ժամանակի ժամանակ։ Ուրեմն այդ օրերը որ մեկը խորանեն, ասենք, եկեղեցական ասենք, կարոզմը գուտա եւ մեկը չի խոսիր իդ իրեն, այդ օրերը անցած են, որտեղ այսօր ինտերնետի, social media-ով ամենքս դարբեր խաղապարներ գրնակար գայել։ Եվ ուրիշ մեկն է սա որ նայեմ Ֆրանսիան, սա եթե Հայաստանի կառավարությունը լուրջ է, պետք է լուրջ նյութական ներդրում կատարի այս աշխատանքի մեջ, եթե գուզի իրականացնել, եթե գուզես լավագույնը ընտրել եւ լավագույնը օգտագործել հայ ժողովրդի ապակայի ծրագրերում համար, պետք է նաեւ նյութականով պատրաստ լալ աշխատել։ Հայերենով ինչպես կրանաս ամփոփել, ոչ այս հարցումներս, այլ ընդհանուր փորձառությունը։
Հիմա երբ որ Երևան էինք, մեկ բանի շատ տպավորիչ էր ինձ համար, որ առաջին անգամը լալով աս իշխանության տակ, աս կառավարության տակ, այո, գրնալալ 100 մեր գիտես մեր ուզած մագարտագին բամը ստեղծած չլան, բայց չանք կթափեն որ գրծածուն չափ լավ ընեն ասկորձը, բայց ավելի կարևորը, երբ որ ես ասենք թե Բարոն Սինանյանին հետ նստիմ եւ ասեմ որ Բարոն Սինանյան շատ լավ էր աս ժողովը, բայց ինչպես քեզի քիչ առաջ ասի պետք էր ավելի action items, ասենք կորձերը լավ որ ավելի գիտնանք որ աբակային ինչ պիտի անենք, մդի գրավ, քրեց եւ ասավ նայ ասոր վրա աս տեսագետեն աս կորձերը պիտի փորձեն գնեն, so ոչ որ դիասպորան կարոզ գուտագոր Հայաստանի եւ ոչ որ Հայաստանի կառավարությունը մեզի կարոզեգոր, բայց միասին աշխատին որ առաջին անգամը լալով ասիգա սկսա տեսնալ որ իրապես մեր ասած մտիկ կնեն եւ բայց նույնադեննա ոչ որ ինչ որ ասենք պիտի կատարեն, բայց դիալոգ մը կստեղծվի որ Հայաստանի եւ Սփյուռքի միջեւ որ շատ կարեւոր է։
Բարոն Nazar Altun շնորհավորենք եւ կգնահատենք ձեր լավադեսությունը իսկապես պոզիտիվ էր բոլոր խոսքերը։ Շնորհակալ ենք այդ դերակցություններուն, որտեղ իսկապես առաջին անգամն է որ ավելի մանրամասնորեն գլսենք, գսկանք այդ ինչ դուք փորձարած եք Հայաստանի մեջ, այնպես որ ժողովրդին համար ասի կարևոր է մեր աշխատանքն նպատակը ժողովրդին դերակցություն տալ է եւ ժողովրդի մեջ ասկային ոգի եւ բարդականություն ցանել է եւ կարծեմ այս հարցազրույցով ես գոնե ավելի լավ կսկամ եւ գուսանք ժողովուրդը նաեւ անդարբեր գեցված չունենան կամ միքսար կամունիկ դալու ինչպես երեկվա ցերնարգը իսկապես հաջող ցերնարգն էր բայց բոլորը թերմոնիկ դարելու մեր մասնակցությամբ մեր դյունտական օգնությամբ մեր միտքով մեր հոգիով ամենքսար մեր բաժինը բերենք եւ ավելի առաջ տանենք հայ ժողովրդի բոլոր գեցվածքը աբական ավելի փայլուն լապորի Nazar, thank you very much.
Շնորհակալ եմ։